I used to think that being sensitive was completely useless. I envied people that could make something and sell it on Etsy or code something and get a job as a programmer. And I just couldn't see how my soft skills, like being empathetic and being able to communicate, would ever really do anything for me. But over time, what I learned is that it is actually one of the most valuable skills you can possibly have and has actually been a major contributor, probably the number one major contributor to me living a life that I really love. My name is Sean. I'm a mental health coach. I see 40 plus clients a week. I have a 98% satisfaction rating. And a lot of the people that I work with struggle with the same issue. They are sensitive and they feel like it's kind of a curse. And if you clicked on this video, maybe you feel that way too, that sensitivity is a curse. And today I'm going to debunk the myth that sensitivity means that you're weak and actually show you how it can be a superpower. I'm going to do that in 3 ways. The first way is that we're going to validate why it feels like a curse. The second is that I'm going to share my own journey with sensitivity so you can sort of see how that goes. And finally, I'll talk you through the transformation that I see in my clients so that you can sort of get an idea of how this happens. So first, let me say that if you do feel like your sensitivity is a curse, I totally get it. It's sort of like Superman. When he was a kid, he had to hide in closets and cover his ears because the world was just so overwhelming for him. And like I sort of alluded to earlier, in this capitalistic society, sensitivity doesn't seem very marketable. It's not like a product that you can sell. Not to mention that anytime that you do show sensitivity, oftentimes people will judge you for it, call you weak for it, tell you to suck it up, be a man, so on and so forth. So of course, you come to this conclusion that it's a curse. It makes perfect sense. But the reality is that just like Superman, it is actually not a curse, but an unrefined superpower. So when I was younger, I worked a customer service job, and I was talking to a friend of mine at the time, and this friend worked in tech and was very successful. And I talked to him about how I really envied his skills because they were so marketable and I felt like I didn't have any. And he asked me what I thought I was good at, and I named, I'm sort of empathetic, good at communicating with people. I can sort of cut through the noise and get to the heart of things. And I still remember what he said to me to this day, which is that is one of the most useful skills that you can have. That skill will serve you in any and every field that you go into, any and every job that you work. That skill will serve you. And that stuck with me. It started to sort of stew in the back of my mind. And as I got on the phones and started working on the phones in the customer service job, I noticed that I was getting a lot of praise for how I communicated with people on the phones. My coworkers would even send difficult customers to me because they knew that I was able to navigate those situations a lot better than a lot of them were able to. And so I started to get more curious about this idea that my friend had spoken about. And so I started asking around to different people about what they thought I was good at. And every single person said the exact thing that I had said to my friend, that I was empathetic, or that they just really felt understood by me, that I was able to sort of get to the root of things very quickly, all these sorts of things. And as I started to think back on my life, I realized that this kind of thing showed up everywhere. That when I first started going to therapy, one of the first things that my therapist said to me was that they thought that I should be a therapist. And working a job at Target that I worked, I was one of the top red card sellers just because of the way that I was able to genuinely connect with the customers. And then the last example is that I was just always the therapist friend in my life. People would just come to me to talk about their problems. But I still wasn't sure what to do with this skill in terms of career. Like, how was I going to make a living for myself with this skill? Until I started to pay attention to what was happening on my stream. So I streamed for about 10 years where I would play games with my community, and it was a fun time. But funny enough, one of the most enjoyable times, both for me and for my community, was every once in a while, or maybe not so every once in a while, I would pause the game And we would just talk and sort of deep dive into something that somebody had said. And we would just have like deep conversations together. And what I realized is that people were sending me money, people were giving me money for something that they could watch for free because they so deeply valued what it was that was being provided. So I thought, heck, why not try this in a more official capacity? So I started offering coaching as a service to my community, and those were actually some of my first ever coaching clients. And as I started to continue to build my business and learn more about entrepreneurship, I remember someone saying, anything that you want is on the other side of a few difficult conversations, which reinforced this idea of how valuable it is to be able to read and understand people and have a sensitivity to what is going on between you and another person. And here we are today. I'm a full-time coach and I love the work that I do, and I also am really happy with my life. Real quick, if you would like to have a deep conversation and have some help in embracing this sensitivity as a superpower one-on-one, I'll leave a link down in the description where you can schedule a free 50-minute session with me. And what's interesting is that the more that I do this coaching work, the more I realize that I am not alone in this experience at all. As I started working with more and more clients, I started to get more and more clients that felt this way, that felt like their sensitivity was a curse. And so many of them had worked so hard to stifle that sensitivity. They were either completely numb or they were completely overwhelmed by their emotions. And not everyone is going to become a coach. So how is this sensitivity at all valuable outside of if you want to become a coach or a therapist or something like that? The cool thing is that, like my friend said, it is actually valuable in any field that you go into. So when I was starting to build my own business, I read this book called Getting Everything That You Can Out of All You've Got. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is that everyone is in sales, whether they know it or not. So a good example of this is, let's say that you go job hunting, which is something, it's a pretty universal experience. Most of us have to hunt for a job at some point in our lives. And so if you have gone job hunting, that's sales. It actually matches up one for one with the sales process. So when you start sending out, resumes and all that sort of thing, that is outreach. When you get an interview and you go in for the interview, that's like the consultation or the sales call. And even once you get the job, when you do things like negotiating for a raise, that is a business negotiation. And I know you might be thinking, wait, Sean, I hate job hunting, so this doesn't make me feel any better about being sensitive. But the reason that most people hate job hunting, in my experience, is because they feel so disempowered in the process. It feels like you're just sending out a whole bunch of, like, you're screaming into the void. You're sending out all these applications and not getting anything back. And so it is an incredibly disempowering process. But the superpower that you have is that you can read people like a book. You can very easily see when something is landing or not landing. And that sort of insight gives you incredible power in a room, because you are able to navigate the situation so much more deftly than somebody that is not aware of any of that stuff that's going on. The trick is learning how to wield your sensitivity. It's sort of like Superman, Clark Kent going into the crystal cave and coming out as Superman. And that is actually the first step in my coaching process. I call it emotional empowerment, which is essentially giving your emotions room to breathe. Because we so often get judged and society sort of teaches us that being sensitive equals weak, what ends up happening is that we constantly invalidate ourselves. Remember when I was talking about how a lot of my clients are either completely emotionally numb or completely overwhelmed? Those are actually two sides of the same coin. And at the core of it is invalidation. Because when we validate our emotions, what ends up happening is that the emotions are able to flow through us in the way that they naturally do. Emotions come and go. But when we invalidate our emotions, they get stopped up and stuck in our system. And so by allowing your emotions room to breathe and allowing them to flow through you, it you are able to wield this sensitivity as a superpower rather than a curse. I hear things all the time from clients like, it is what it is, nothing I can do about it now, or other people have it worse. And these are all phrases that we use to invalidate ourselves. And even as I'm saying them now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, sometimes it is, there is nothing that I can do about it now. Other people do have it worse. And that's exactly how insidious this is. That even as we call it out, your mind rails against it because it's like, no, I need to invalidate my emotions. It's important that I invalidate my emotions. And that makes sense because you have been hurt for trying to feel your emotions in the past. And it is incredibly scary and hard to set that tool down. This tool of invalidating your emotions has allowed you to get through your life to survive. And now here this guy on the internet is saying you need to set that tool down and pick up this different tool. And these parts inside of you are like, that's crazy. Why would I do that? And so at the end of sessions with clients, what I usually do is I'll give them some sort of assignment to work on over the week. And there are a couple of things that I always try to make sure that they're aware of when it comes to assignments. The first is that I think a lot of people view the coach-client relationship as sort of mentor-mentee, and I don't really view it that way. I view it as much more of a collaboration where we're working together to solve some sort of problem. So if I ever suggest anything that feels a little, you're like, oh, I really like that idea, but could we twist this one element, or I just don't like that idea at all, I always want you to feel free to say so. And the second is that I view all assignments like scientific hypotheses. So if they work, great. And if they don't, that gives us information, which is also great. So I'm going to give you some action items to work on over the week. And feel free to leave in the comments if anything doesn't quite feel right about it, or if you do try it out, what the results are like, how it went for you. I would love to hear that sort of thing. So the first action item is I want you to start to notice anytime you say these kinds of phrases to yourself. It is what it is. Other people have it worse. Nothing I can do about it now. And when you notice that, I want you to imagine like you are talking with a friend and they are going through this same issue and you really just want to be there for your friend. You can tell your friend is in a lot of pain and you want to be there for them and really make them feel heard and understood. What would you say to them? The second thing that I want you to try out is actually sort of taking a page out of my own life, which is to go around to some people that you really care about and trust and ask them what they think you're really good at, where you sort of shine the most in your life, and see what they say. And like I said, if you're comfortable sharing any of what you find, if you do try these things out, I would love to hear the responses that you get in the comments. And a big reason that I was able to hone this superpower for myself and not feel like it was a curse is because I had a really good support system. I had people that really cared about me and sort of showed me, held up a mirror to me and showed me what the value was of what I provided. And so if you would like that kind of mirror held up to you, somebody who is able to see the gift that sensitivity can be, I'll leave a link down in the description where we can have a free 50-minute session. And earlier in the video, I mentioned this idea of allowing emotions to flow through you. And it's like, well, how the heck do I do that? Well, one of the best ways to do that is actually through meditation. And I know everyone talks about meditation, how amazing it is. And I can't do meditation because every time I try to do meditation, my mind just runs like crazy. And so if you really struggle with that, if that sounds familiar, if I'm reading your mind right now, this video talks about what meditation actually is and what it isn't, and helps you develop a meditation practice that will actually work for you. I hope it helps, and I'll see you next time. Bye. That's also the wrong screen. Video.